Yeah.
Okay, well, we're getting a bit into the agenda, so I'll just, I think that's great. Well, I'll call the meeting to order at 8:06 a.m. Now that Katie's here. I think, John, I texted you, but Katie, Amanda's not able to make it this morning. She had an unexpected conflict. So we will loop her in this evening with full school committee. But we have a couple things to discuss today. One is just final kind of review of the budget priorities. We have the Q1 report, just confirming the budget timeline, and then the budget coordination committee report, which Nathan and John just kind of gave, given I wasn't there. Anything else just to close that loop, Nathan, John, anything else to share about the budget coordination committee?
No, the revenue projection was executed by Nick. It was very similar to the one that he provided to the school committee on the at our last meeting. And to Nathan's point, there were discussions about revolving accounts or stabilization accounts at the town level that would be discussed further.
Great.
And Mark, just I think the idea is that we will each kind of individually review and provide input on the policy documents. And I think if we could all probably do a review of the 3 policies prior to the next meeting and provide some kind of comments, I think that would probably be useful. Although I get the sense that it's going to take, it's not like we're going to be voting on or somehow approving policies next week.
Yeah.
So there's a long road in front of us, I think.
Okay. Sounds good. All right. Jumping back up, I'd love, I think, to start with the budget priorities documents. And then again, Nathan, I kind of made a copy of it and dropped it in the in today's meeting folder for the finance committee. John, I don't know, you mentioned kind of what changes you were going to make. You've made those changes, so I don't know if there's any other framing or anything else you want to kind of give, but just want to make sure we open the opportunity. Nathan, if you have any feedback or anything else we should discuss on this before the meeting tonight.
So I had 2 points to make. So thank you, Mark. One is I want to thank Katie for actually making some edits as well. They were targeted and very helpful. So thank you, Katie. And I want to know what the committee's thoughts are on providing the examples on page 2, or having that. Would that be misleading in any way? Do we feel that people will take those as examples as hypothetical, or do we want to take them off the document for presentation's sake?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was thinking a similar thing, John, in that like we have them numbered there. And so almost as if this is saying, under budget priority number 3, right? Are we like within this saying our number 1 priority under budget priority number 3 is the 1 to 2 buses? Like, I don't know if that's actually what we're saying. So I don't know if changing it to bullet points and making that kind of, you do say examples pretty clearly, but that's a fair point that some people might take that as these are the things we're saying we're definitely going to do. And I don't know if that's 100% true. Nathan, what are your thoughts?
So I haven't had a chance to. Sorry, can you hear me, guys?
Yeah. I can also share a screen if that's helpful.
I'll be back inside in just 1 second.
Okay.
I haven't had a chance to review the most recent document, but I recall this part of the document. I would recommend, my perspective is to recommend removing them. I think they are concrete examples. Probably several of them are actual, I would venture to guess some version of them are actually things we might prioritize. But even if you note that they are examples, I think people can get tethered to specific ideas. And if we're not prepared yet to commit to those ideas, we might as well just take them out.
Yeah, and I can always use those verbally as the examples that tonight I can just express them verbally, but I can take them out of the document. We can delete those as a draft. We can make that instead of a draft. We can change the version of this, but I feel more comfortable taking them out because I don't want people to get tethered to them. So I would agree.
Great. Katie, anything to add?
No, I agree. And I would say just like the numbering convention, I think people would take that as, oh, this is your top priority. So
Yeah.
if we're going to be sharing this document pretty wide, if we share this document without having that explanation, I think it's just better to take it out.
Yeah, agreed. Okay. So what I will do, Mark, I'll go into the folder, take it out, create a new version of it, so I can keep this one in the back burner, and then put it back in the folders. Charlene will do that today, and then we'll have it in the school committee folder as an updated one. And
Great. Anything else on the budget priorities, Doc?
yep.
All right, moving right along. Budget timeline, just quick review. We are at the 22nd. I still have in this budget doc timeline 10/31 as our school committee warrant committee meeting date, but that's not right, is it? What, I can look this up. I also don't want to waste time. I just didn't remember if anybody off the top of their head remembered what date we had picked, because I'm not sure if I've.
I don't feel like I have confirmation on anything right now. I'm going to look back at my calendar real quick, but
I thought it was Monday, the 3rd of November.
I think you are right.
okay.
Let me see. Yes, 3rd of November at 7 o'clock. That's their normal meeting time. So I can let me send an email with all of you on it and Jay and Charlene. So that Charlene can create a calendar invite. So apologies for that. I should have done that after we previously confirmed. I will update that. And then, I think talked about this just very briefly with the town administrator report on the revenue forecast, but I think just we have in our calendar kind of a brief check-in on how the town revenue forecasts align or don't align with kind of our school expense forecasts. What that might mean as it relates to kind of the overall tone of what we're looking at for a budget for next year. But hopefully
yeah, I think that this might be a conversation for another time, but I think when we start to think about when Katie and I begin to draft the 27 budget, we talked a little bit about assumptions last time. And I think one of the assumptions should be that, and I won't word it like this on any kind of a document, but in reality, the guidance from the town hall was to roll over everybody you have plus COLA. I mean, that's exactly what Amy Dexter said. It's rolling over your FTEs plus COLA would be, quote, level service. She's had some comment like that because I asked her that specific question to kind of get a bread and butter idea of how we wanted to proceed. And I was very happy with that response because that's how I look at it as well, because that gives us room within our current FTE and non-salary items to realign and prioritize things that we need to do and demonstrate what we're might be removing versus what we're adding. So I don't know if everybody else heard that, but in terms of an assumptions list, that would be something that I would think may be important.
I heard that too, John. I think maybe I should have pushed more in that meeting to gain clarity. Is the percentage though increase that they were projecting was I don't think aligned to what that number will be.
Correct.
Right? The percent increase they were showing was like 2.9%, which feels low. Feels like a cut budget more than a level service. And so, so that is the conflict in my head around that. I don't know, Katie, what your takeaway is, or if there's like a way to try and get clarity around that. And mostly, and from my perspective, this is around like just not wasting y'all's time on working on budget scenarios that then are garbage because the town's going to say, hey, this isn't realistic and you got to do this or that, or like keep it to a 2.9% increase. Sorry, Katie.
I was just going to say, I think our focus and really what I would see, my role being in supporting John and you all in creating the budget is to let them know what the expenses are looking like. And so in Amy saying, the kind of the direction from the town is tell us what your budget is going to cost you next year, rolling over FTE and adding in that COLA and kind of factoring in any contractual increases on the general expense side. And so I kind of think that's what we should do. I know that the revenue projections are showing kind of like the assumptions baked into that, maybe won't necessarily match what the expenses are, but I think our focus is truly just to say this is what the expenses are. And then I think from the town side, it's going to be up to them to say, okay, we have this operating budget stabilization fund, and in order to make up the variance, we may need to utilize it. That was just kind of my interpretation of it.
Great. I mean, it sounds like you and John are on the same page, so that's fine with me. Nathan, any thoughts? Anything else?
No, I don't think I have anything to add here.
Great. All right. Any other feedback points related to these old business items, the budget timeline or the budget priorities? If not, then I will turn it over to Katie for the Q1 report.
Okay, so there is a copy of the report in the finance subcommittee folder for today's meeting. I had sent that over to you all yesterday, and then I also put a copy of the report in the folder for tonight's meeting, so it can be shared with the full committee. So just talking about the format of the report, this is obviously the first report for this fiscal year, Q1 report. So I really tried to provide the first part of the report is the memo, which provides the context of what the numbers are showing. The second part of the report is the actual financial exhibit that itself, and I tried to create that financial exhibit. It's a little bit different than the quarterly reports that were presented last year. It's broken up by cost center, and then we further broke the information down by the DESI object codes, which is just a classification around salaries and general expenses. So you can see that breakdown for each cost center. In the financial report, John and I talked before I sent you and before I finalized the report, and we thought it was important to be able to show the FY25 actual expenditures, because we talk a lot about making sure that our budget, and when we're talking about the budget, we're always being considerate of living in the 3 years, past year, current year, and next year. And so the FY25 actual expenditure amounts are also included in this report. And I think that's a little bit different than last year's report, and we hadn't necessarily discussed that, but we thought that that would be another important piece of information to be able to provide, so that when we look at what the original budget was, and then you can see there is an updated budget, FY26 budget amount in the financial report, you just have a little more context on why the numbers may have changed. The financial report, you can see the expenditures that we've incurred up until September 30th, and also the encumbrances. And then further down in the report, there is a revolving fund summary. And then I also tried to just provide kind of like a glossary of terms, because there are some references in the memo and then in the financial exhibit to the object code expenditures, what an expenditure is, what an encumbrance is. And so just trying to provide more context around what those terms are. And that is the last kind of like piece of the overall financial report. So just to go back up to the memo, in the memo, we talked a little bit about the process of looking at FY26 for this year, and a big piece of what we've discussed previously and what we're continuing to look at is just making sure that the budget, FY26 budget, the budget that was appropriated to us at town meeting is the budget that we're operating under, and that budget appropriation is the maximum amount that we can potentially spend. And so we truly looked at, over the summer, looked at the FY25 actuals, took a really hard look at, now that we know what our salary expenditures are going to be and the cost of living increase for the year for each one of our bargaining units. We know what the increase is going to be for transportation. We know what the special education tuitions are going to be at this point in time. And the caveat to that is could and will change throughout the year. But with all of that information, we just wanted to make sure that the FY26 budget and how the budget was broken out was appropriate. And so we talked about that a little bit in the report. We all have talked about previously over the summer that we went through the process, a very intentional process of looking at every single one of our positions. So if a position was open, truly looking at that, saying, do we need to fill it? Could we potentially pause it for this 1 year, for fiscal year 26, just making sure that we had enough money in each one of our budget lines to be able to appropriately cover the expenditures that we're projecting that we are going to incur throughout the fiscal year. And so that was a pretty thorough process. I tried to summarize it kind of shortly in this memo, but I'm hoping that it provides some more context for the actual financial exhibit. And I'm happy to answer any specific questions about that as well. And then in the report, I also included just information on kind of where we stand at the end of September. It's very early, obviously, in the fiscal year. We've only had 2 pay periods for our teaching staff, and we've had a number of pay periods for our staff that works throughout the year, but that's a smaller percentage. So in knowing that 80% of our budget really is tied to salary expenditures, and then you can also see in that report that we have not yet started encumbering salaries. We've talked about that in the past. We will start encumbering salaries for second quarter, but that's a big piece of seeing what is outstanding as far as salary payments are and how are we tracking towards the budget. And so right now in the report, we don't have the encumbrances included just because it's pretty early in the year, but that will be a piece of the financial report for Q2. All of that being said, in some of what we had talked about last year, the process of encumbering expenses, so making sure that we're creating purchase orders and really memorializing the fact that we know that we have expenses that we will incur throughout the year, even though they haven't happened yet. We really need to be able to earmark those funds in the budget so that we're not overspending, so we're not spending the same budget line twice. And so I had made a note in the report at this time last year, we had only encumbered, say, 60% of our general expense lines. This year, we far exceeded that number. And I think that could be potentially, if you were just looking at this report and comparing it to last year, you would say, like, why are they spending so much money? It's not that we're spending more money. We're just doing a better job saying, we know that we will have this expense throughout the year, and we're going to actually put that expense in the system as a placeholder so that we know that we'll have that money available to us and we won't overspend. And so that was a big kind of like process, systemic change that we're making. And I think when I look at the report from last year and then look at the report from this year, it's a pretty significant difference in the amount that we're encumbering, or that kind of those expenses that we've already earmarked in the system. And I take that as a good sign because it gives us the ability to really to be able to manage the budget and manage the expenditures. In some instances, we may need to push back to department heads and to principals and say, no, you don't have money to be able to do X, Y, and Z. But that's why that's kind of why we have that process. So
Mhm.
just wanted to make a note because I think that's something I had put in the memo. That's something that you can kind of see in the financial report. But I think it's really important when we kind of just talk about like process and budget administration. And then just the last piece that I wanted to note, we did put I included just some examples of actual expenditures for some of the areas that we have talked about previously, but just to review the areas that we track pretty closely because there may be some variability. So those areas are special education with our tuitions that we have to pay for some of our out-of-district placement, and the transportation to be able to get our Milton students to those out-of-district placements. So there's further information and those budget lines included in the memo. You can see the actual expenditures from FY25. What we had originally projected the budget in FY26, and that's based off of information that we had last October and November. So since that time, there's been changes, and we really wanted to make sure that the budget reflected that. And then you can see the difference between our original budget projection and then our updated budget projection. So those areas again are special education, which is tuition, transportation, and in some instances, contracted services. Transportation, just yellow bus transportation, so the transportation that we're providing in district. And then I also provided a kind of a breakdown of substitutes and extra duties, because that was one area that we found last year because it is variable in nature. And because the budget for FY25 and historically we had been underfunded in that area. And so that's something that we've been paying pretty close attention to. So I just wanted to be able to really call that out in the report as well. And that's something that we will continue to talk about, figure out if there's a way that we can be more efficient in, using our resources and using our budget to be able to cover what those expenses will be, and then just making sure that we're budgeting appropriately moving forward.
Great. Thank you very much for the report and for giving us the information we were talking about previously around the particular line items, and just your summaries are always very detailed and helpful. Nathan, any questions from you?
I do. And Katie, thank you for this report. I thought it was really well done and got a lot of great information about it. So or out of it. So really appreciate the work that you put into this. Maybe I do have a few questions, so I'll try not to hog all the time, and I can also save some questions for this evening if that makes more sense. Could you just go like another level or two deeper on encumbrances? And I'll just tell you a couple of questions that I have. One of them was about expected to see salaries encumbered here. It sounds like that's just like next in the work. I assume practically most of our salaries are basically encumbered. The second one is you mentioned that because of the way that you're managing encumbered expenses, it's 78% now. It was 60% last year at this time. Should it have been, I guess I'm wondering, so yeah, that comparison is, there's an 18-point difference there because of the way we're managing the budget. If we had been doing it this way last year, would we be at about 78% last year? Like is there actually a meaningful difference in some way? Like this is like a tabletop difference, whereas like I'm wondering if there's an actual practical difference. And then third question on encumbrances. I had it. Are encumbered expenses, are encumbrances basically a way to help you forecast the budget? Or are encumbrances also kind of like fully locked expenditures that we have no flexibility around, like contracted, like we are locked in and we are going to spend this money, even if we get to a tight point in the year, we might prefer to reallocate it elsewhere?
So I'll start with the last question, if that's okay. So encumbrances are a combination of both. So with our general expenses, we know that we have contracts that we're locked into for the year, and we encumber those expenses for the entire year. Although we typically are paying expenses after the expenses incurred, so on a monthly basis. So an example of that would be yellow bus transportation. So we have a contract for the year. We know that we're going to run our buses the 10 months that we're in school. So we encumber the entire expense for the school year, but we're only paying it on a monthly basis. So after the month closes, we get an invoice, we pay it. But we want to encumber that entire amount, because if we didn't encumber it, and it wasn't encumbered in the first quarter report last year, I believe, it almost inflates what we have remaining in the budget amount. And so it makes it harder to track. By having it encumbered, we know we're going to expend that entire budget. In some instances, we may need more money. And that was part of that FY26 kind of, when we fully looked at it and said, okay, we didn't have an executed contract last November. Now we do. We know what the exact amount is going to be. And so we made sure that the budget reflected what the expenditure is, and then we encumber it. So the budget and the expenditure should, in some instances, match. Specific to transportation, we also have a fuel surcharge that's not encumbered. And so there's a little space in that budget line where we're not spending the entire budget, because every month, depending on what the fuel prices do, we have to pay the bus company the delta between a set rate and what we're actually spending on fuel based off of mileage. And I could go into a lot of detail, but I won't bore you with that. So that's kind of a combination of the two. So another example of encumbering expenses that's a little bit more, it may change, is providing encumbrances or kind of earmarking funding for copy paper. And so what we did typically in the past, if someone needed paper, they would just reach out and say, hey, I need to buy some paper. And then we would just encumber it when they reached out. The change for this year was we said, no, tell us what you're going to, just look back in the history. If you got 4 pallets last year, you're going to get 4 pallets this year. Let's encumber it. And then if halfway through the year, we're like, whoa, you're going through a lot of paper, we can make adjustments. But at least we have the budget earmarked that we know you're going to spend this amount on paper. Yep. So that's kind of like another example of an encumbrance where there's no contract. Like, we don't have to get 4 pallets of paper, but we just know based off of some historical information that that's typically what we use. So we do an encumbrance, so we make sure that the budget is available for it.
That makes sense. Got it. I would find fuel surcharge details interesting because I'm an operations nerd, but we don't have to spend time on that today. Thank you for that, Katie. Of
course. I could talk about this forever, and I know that people usually sit there and roll their eyes at me, so happy to provide any information, but certainly don't want to bore anyone.
You're in a safe space here, Katie. Yeah. 2 operations nerds here. I had a couple of questions. One was just on some of the column titles.
Yes.
And I think starting on, well, they're not page numbers on here, but anyway, starting in your the financial report summary. It says FY26 expenditures as of 9/30/2025 in 2 columns. And so I didn't know if one was the total encumbrances and one was the claims against those covered encumbrances thus far this year, but I wasn't sure what the difference between those 2 columns was.
So it's FY25 actual expenditures, so what we spent last year. Yep. FY26 budget original, so that was how the original budget was created, like in November. Mm-hmm. The budget updated, so that was kind of like that recast process, so you can see the changes.
Yep.
And then it's FY26 expenditures as of 9/30/25, so that's the money that we've already processed, the money's out the door. Then the next column is FY26 encumbrances.
Oh, expenditures and I'm just,
Yes,
all
Yeah,
right. I'm sorry.
that's okay.
Can't read. Thank you. All right. So
No, no worries.
yeah, so the encumbrances is in that fifth column, whatever that is.
Yes,
Yeah.
yep.
And then the
And
expenditures.
that was just the point, and that's kind of to Nate's point too. You can see that there's zeros in the salaries, so the salaries are not encumbered yet because we don't have the system, the accounting system and the payroll system doesn't encumber for us. That's a manual process, and that information will be included in the Q2 report.
Gotcha. In jumping up, thank you for reading for me. Jumping back up to the top, what were the when you have the table with like special education transportation and those
Yep.
the three at the bottom, the general expenses, contracted supplies, and other, is that under transportation? Is that part of transportation, or is that part of a different line item outside of special education and transportation? I'm sorry if you said that and I missed it in the explanation. I just wasn't 100% sure what those three lines were.
I think I may have, I need to double check that for you because I think I may have forgotten a header in that section.
Yeah.
So let me double check that. That is actually, that bottom section is athletics. I think I had
Okay.
made a note to increase. So when we talk about the reallocation, significant increases or special ed, athletics and transportation. So I'm sorry, let me fix that. So that bottom section is athletics. It's just missing the header.
Yeah, missing the header. Yeah,
Good
that's
point.
awesome.
Yep. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm glad we were able to do some of those reallocations. This clearly raises places where like we would have been more concerned if we did not do the reallocation. So that's great. Under special education, general expenses, I know we reallocated, it looks like we were reallocating even though the budget was already kind of substantially over what our actual expenditures were last year. It seems like right now we have like 25% more in the budget than we expended last year. And I assume that is because we have some new needs within special education services that weren't needs last year, but that are costly. Is that, I'm saying you, no, I just generally want to make sure like that's kind of the logic here of like why that large jump by the 25%.
Mhm.
Okay.
So it is, it's a combination of increased expenses just because there may be changes with students or service delivery. That is a piece of it. It's also looking at the utilization of the circuit breaker funding that we received. So last year for FY25, in order to cover our expenses, we used all of the circuit breaker funding that we received. This year, we are being very intentional about not building all of circuit breaker, so all of the circuit breaker revenue into so I guess the best way to, I'm trying to think of like the best way to say this that makes sense, but not building that entire whatever we're going to receive into the budget as spending it right away. So we are trying to, when we receive in the circuit breaker, make sure that this is year one of us retaining some of that circuit breaker revenue so that we can continue to create that circuit breaker balance that we've been talking about, and I think we'll talk about more at a future.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So the expenditures, I think the part I wasn't clear, the expenditures actually don't include any expenditures that were tagged to circuit breaker. They're only expenditures that were tagged to that. So like our spending last year was the 6.6 million plus then the full allocation.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct.
Totally makes sense. Great.
Yep.
Thank you for clarifying. The two places in scrolling back down now to the table I couldn't read before. The two places that seem like we are over encumbered or in terms of like FY26 funds remaining column. which I think you hit on briefly, was the contracted services for athletics and student activities. I didn't do the math. Is that number based on the reallocation, the like negative 33,000? Is that after the reallocation or is that before the reallocation?
So that is after the reallocation. So what we did with athletics, because athletics is one of the accounts or one of the cost centers where we also have revenue that we receive from user fees. And so we haven't with athletics, because we're still in the process of bringing in that revenue, there may be some expenses that are currently assigned to the operating budget that we move over to the revolving account. And so what we tried to do this year is, I think because athletics is unique in the fact it's a little different from other departments, that it has the budget in the operating budget, but then it also has the budget in a revolving account. Because of the revenue that we bring in, we tried to make sure that we had clarity around which accounts each one of the expenses is going to be allocated to, whether it be operating or revolving. That's still a work in process. So I think in looking at that report, seeing there may be something that we assign to the operating budget as an expense for operating, but when we look at our revenue that we're bringing into the revolving account, we may reallocate that over to the revolving account. You can see in athletics, there was a pretty significant increase of one of, I believe it's the contracted services line, which is originally it was the 95,000 was the budget. We increased it to 240. That's reflective of the transportation for athletics. And so we've always been kind of under budgeted there. So we really tried to increase that. And so if we're paying for transportation for athletics from the operating budget, that may free up some money in the revolving fund that we can just shift over that other contracted services expense, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And then the other one that had a similar negative balance, much larger negative balance, was the general expense contracted services under special ed.
Yep. And so for special ed, right now, special ed, all of the expenses and the encumbrances should be current for what we know as of 9/30. But I had said kind of in the report, a piece of that may be similar to athletics covered by circuit breaker.
Yeah.
But I can't assign that expense to circuit breaker right now because we don't have any money in circuit breaker. So we're still waiting for that revenue, for those reimbursements to come to us from the state before we can assign expenses there.
Gotcha. But our anticipation of the circuit breaker revenue is beyond that number and then some, as we're again trying to work to pull back some circuit breaker reserves.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Mark, can I just ask a follow-up on that? Like, I don't know what is the timing on circuit breaker reimbursement, and could we end up with like a cash flow problem here?
So it's quarterly. We just received the first quarter payment in October. And so, yes, the short answer is yes. And that is kind of speaks to why it's best practice to have, you're really supposed to be working from last year's revenue so you can make sure that you have cash.
Yeah.
So what had happened, we actually experienced it last year. Sometimes the payments at the end of the year don't come in until July. And so if you looked at the year-end financial report, if you looked at the revolving account balance, you can actually see that circuit breaker was overexpended because we didn't get the payment until July 12th or whatever it was. And so we have 90 days from the end of the fiscal year to be able to cover those negative balances in the revolving fund. If you don't cover them, then they will deduct whatever the overage is from your free cash balance on the town side. So it's not good practice to do that. We had done that because we knew that we were going to get that payment in July and it was going to cover the balance. So we knew we would have no issues to do that within the 90 days. But that's kind of something, that's a practice that we're trying to break ourselves out of moving forward.
I just want to reinforce that point. I think it's interesting that is exactly why we need to create minimum expectations and policy guidance around some of our revolving accounts, because the depletion of the circuit breaker account, we're sitting with $8,000 in that account, and we are already overextended. And if we were a nonprofit and didn't have the strength of the town's cash flow, Nathan, and we were in our nonprofit world, which I was a part of just 6 months ago, we wouldn't be able to pay our bills.
Mm-hmm.
So the depletion of the revolving accounts in FY24 and then further in FY25 have put us in a very, very hard position, which is the underpinnings of why we're trying to not fill vacancies, reallocate funds where we can, and put them in places where we know we're going to have challenges moving forward. With also the understanding that, to Katie's point, if we can incrementally each year deposit an additional amount of money for 3 years in a row and be very disciplined, the goal is to wake up in FY27 or FY28 with healthy balances in those revolving accounts, that we no longer have to worry about this kind of, even though we don't worry about cash flow, we do worry about not being in best practice mode when it comes to our financial planning each year. And these are the things that are kind of not on the front page of the Times, or even in the conversations we like to have. How many staff do we need? How many do we need? We need to replenish those accounts incrementally in order to be fiscally sound. And it will take 3 years. So we have to start this year, and we have to set the school department up for success. Transportation, and if you notice, it's transportation, because that revolving account was over exhausted a few years ago. Athletics was overtaxed a few years ago. Circuit breaker was overtaxed a few years ago. And even some of our community schools funding was overtaxed a few years ago. So we are in an uphill battle despite an override. That's a very important part of the underpinnings of why we're financially being so conservative.
Yeah.
I think it would be a good thing. I mean, thanks for that, John. Totally agree with that. And just in tonight's school committee meeting, I think we should hammer that message home. Like when you're talking about the budget priorities for next year, like this is a real-time example of why that is priority number one. And just kind of, it ties real numbers to the problem you're trying to solve.
Mm-hmm.
Mark, I have one more question on the budget report? Do we have time?
Yeah.
Okay. The one piece of data that was kind of missing for me, and I don't know what's standard in these reports, is to know, thinking about this as like a quarterly budget to actual report. I see we have spent 20. So I can't, what I can't tell, in the last column of the table, it says FY26% committed. I don't know if that means spent and encumbered.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay. I think either you can tell me now, or we can think about this in future reports. Like, is that, what I don't know is like, are we above or below where we think we are supposed to be at this point in the year? Like I don't know if this matches the Q1 forecast.
Yeah, I can just say from my experience, Nathan, I think it's the point Katie made previously, which is just, it is hard for me to know, because if the district department is doing more encumbrances, then these percentages are higher than they have been. But that might be for really good reasons, right? That are going to be beneficial later on in the year. But that makes it hard for us to say, like, well, last year we were only at 45% encumbered. And so, like, wow, we're way over budget. I don't know. And so I guess I just continue to ask Katie and, to flag, are there any places within this, based upon those percent committed, that you are concerned about, because you think this is something that's driving, beyond just the increased encumbrances, but that there's actually an increased spending for some unexpected reason? But John, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I just so when I look at that line, the first thing I think of, generally speaking, is look at all your salaries are at about 8%, because we're 1/10 of the way through the school year. So you can see that they're all pretty well lined up. I agree that the encumbrances may shade the actuals in a way that might be hard to compare last year to this year. But one of the things I want to make sure that you feel very confident in, is that if you remember last year when people were asking, well, what do you need to finish the year? And Katie couldn't put her finger on it. It was because nothing was encumbered, right? So this is a tool, and this very thoughtful tool is to be able to say, we know we have this many expenses and we know we have money to cover those expenses. So we can look at how we want to frame that and how we can explain it and unpack it for the public's consumption, which I think will be important. But I feel very comfortable knowing that as many expenses as we know we will be committed to making have been encumbered and we have the funds to pay them. And we're telling the principals and other people who spend money, don't bring me anything that's not in your salary line, and do not come to us with someone who deserves money because they just did something like a translation and you didn't ask permission, because they won't be paid. So we have a process now where anything that happens has to be written and approved before the actual action happens. Then the approval document is in Katie's hands. And then when the work is completed, a second document is signed by me saying that the work has been completed, and only then does it get paid out. But we know we have the money to actually pay that out because we have the approval document months before that has been encumbered into Katie's budget. So it might be hard to explain the encumbrances and the actuals as we move through, but I think the encumbrances, we can figure that out, because I'd rather have the encumbrances in place because it's more fiscally sound.
And
I guess one of the takeaways I have here from this conversation, I know you haven't yet done the work to encumber the salaries, but once you do that, I'm going to assume that the vast majority of budgeted salaries will be encumbered. You can tell me if that assumption is wrong, leaving us with basically $500,000 in unencumbered funds for the year. Right? Okay.
How do you come up with the number $500,000, Nathan? Sorry if I missed something.
That's the general there's $467,000 in unencumbered general operating expenses. So I was just rounding up, assuming that there will be some pocket change unencumbered from salaries, but
So if I can just add, I think the difference, yes, there is a pretty noticeable difference in the encumbrances for general expenses for this report. I think the difference, just for me, the difference between last year and this year is kind of the administration of the budget for this year. So we have shared with each one of the principals their general expense report, so they can see every single line. They know what the balance is in every single account. And I think John and I have been very clear in, this is your budget and we are not going over budget, right? And so even if we were 99% encumbered at this point, meaning that we had earmarked 99% of the budget, that would mean we only had that 1% to spend, and that was it. And then if we knew that we had some sort of contractual obligation that would take up that other 1%, then we would just have to freeze the other budget areas. So I think a piece of it is really like the shared ownership between, it's not just a business office function, it's each one of the principals and department heads managing their budget, knowing that they can only spend what they have and they can't go over. And then us just being very clear about putting the information in the system and then sharing out that information with them. And so that wasn't necessarily, we weren't kind of in that mode of doing that last year. So I think that's a pretty significant difference when I look at the budget administration. For the salary piece, I know it's tricky not to see the encumbrances in the system, but this report and the budget as it stands, the FY26 budget as it stands now, during the summer, we went through and looked at every single position, every single person. We went through with the principals, John went through with Danielle. It was like a pretty time-consuming process of saying, we need to know every single person and we need to know every single salary. And that is what you see reflected in the budget. So I feel confident saying the budget reflects what our expenditures are going to be for salaries. From September or August 28th or whatever the first day of school is, there will be some fluctuations in those salary amounts because we may have employees that will be unpaid, or there will be instances that come up that will create a variance from that budget to what we actually spend. But we know that the budget is reflective of what the anticipated expenses were going to be for salaries for this year. So Nate, I do think that it is reasonable to look at this report and say the assumption is that we're going to completely expend the salaries for the remainder of the year. And then we know that we have about $500,000 in general expenditures that budget isn't committed yet.
Thanks. Thank you.
We're a little bit out of time, but the only other thought as I'm kind of looking through this is there a percentage of encumbrances kind of at the cost center level where you feel like the schools have gone through and, you know, done a good job of identifying what their projected expenses are? I just look at kind of some variation of like 33% for Milton High School versus, you know, a lot of the schools are closer to like 70% or 60%. So again, that might be just an operational difference between those schools. But that's the only other thing I was wondering if that is helpful as you all look at it, of like those percentage encumbrances differences or committed differenents.
Usually, Mark, at the elementary level, there's a lot of consumables bought. So you'll see like the math director will buy everything for the elementaries right at the beginning of the year. Same with ELA, same with science materials, et cetera. And so so that it's not a surprise that there's a high percentage of their non-salary budgets being expended and encumbered. Because actually, in my eyes, I'll probably shut down non-salary budgets sometime in late March, early April, so we can actually get a good handle on closing out months before the end of the fiscal year, and then have them ask us for things that they may need, as opposed to them saying, "Oh, geez, I still have 10,000 left. I just should go buy." So we'll pull all that back, because the majority of the school spending should be done by halfway through the year, except for high school graduation and end of the year things. It's really all materials should be purchased and in place. So that's what you might see more of the elementary level and the middle school level.
Anything else on this report before we close this out?
I just want to thank Katie, because this is very comprehensive in the charts that we're really going over. The cost, the expenditures versus the projected budget is a really great start to make sure we know that very much the detail line by line and cost center by cost center. And I very much appreciate the hard work that it takes to produce this on a regular basis with a narrative that matches and a strategy that is continuing to guide it. So thank you, Katie, very much.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you so much. Really appreciate both of y'all, all your work you're doing. Moving down, Budget Coordination Committee, we already discussed. Discussion of next meeting date and agenda. We are meeting next week about the revolving accounts discussion. Katie, you had flagged last week too, if it would be the appropriate time to go through kind of draft warrant committee slides, which I totally agree with. I think that'd be great. So we'll do that next week if that gives you all enough time to throw together some slides. In terms of the slides, are there any slides y'all would like our support with, or us to put anything together, or y'all want to take the first crack and expect our feedback?
I started working on some slides just based off of, I think it was actually, we had put some notes in the budget calendar, just based off of the proposed agenda that I had shared previously. Is it fair to just continue working on that? I think we had talked about like budget timeline and some of those different pieces.
Yeah, that's great. All right.
Can I just flag something for you folks to put on the back burner? I haven't even talked to Katie about this yet, so I apologize, Katie, for putting something on your radar screen. But we are taking a deep dive into the MCAS data and the needs of students and the needs of schools. And we have met with the principal of the Tucker School, who has come up with some strategies that she would like to introduce to make direct and positive impact on those challenges in students not making benchmark. 4 of her strategies do not have any budget impact at all. It's just rearranging staff, rearranging some schedules in order to get staff directly involved with certain students. We're working with the union on that in case there's anybody who says that that might not be their job. So the union's been open to that. And there also might be several small expenditures that we would like to afford her to provide extra boosts of support, to provide the extra boost of support to the students who aren't meeting benchmark at the Tucker. I'm working with Celeste to create a proposal that I was going to give to Katie to find out after this Q1 was done, what we felt our comfortable level of expenditures were in addition to what we've already encumbered in order to make positive impact on scores this year with students that we're having in front of us right now. So just kind of wanted to flag that as something that I will bring to this group either next week or the following week when we polish it up. And we also do an internal tracking of what kind of money we feel comfortable with at this stage of the year, committing to that work. We know it's important in what we have to do, but we also have to be able to afford it. So just as an FYI, that might be something that will be in front of this group in the next 2 weeks.
All right. I have to jump, so I appreciate that very much. Can I get a motion to adjourn? I will make a motion to adjourn. Can I get a second, Nathan?
Second.
All right, all in favor, roll call vote, Nathan? Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you all very much. Appreciate that very much, John. Thank you, Katie.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, looking forward to that, John. Thank you.